All right. Good morning. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. Happy Thursday morning. Hope your day is off to a great start. Welcome to PT on Ice. It is Leadership Thursday. My name is Alan. I'm happy to be your host today, live here on YouTube, live here on Instagram, talking all things leadership. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Operating Officer here at ICE and a faculty member in our fitness athlete division. Today, we're going to talk about the continuing education industry in physical therapy. Is it all just a racket? Is it just a Ponzi scheme to steal your money? We're talking about a paper that came out recently related to that and kind of take a deep dive into continuing education, continuing competence standards today. Before we get started, it is Leadership Thursday. We talk all things business management, business ownership. It also means it is Gut Check Thursday. This week's Gut Check Thursday, 5 rounds for time. 200-meter row for gentlemen, 175-meter row for ladies. Off the rower, 15 hand release push-ups, and then 10 pull-ups with the option to make that a little bit harder by doing strict pull-ups. And then we finish with 5 bench press. The RX weight there, 155 for guys, 105 for ladies. Something heavy for 5 reps that, especially if you're working out by yourself, that you can knock out unbroken. So a push-pull workout. I did this last night. I tested in the garage. I did a strict pull-up option. I wish I hadn't. It took me significantly longer than I think it should have. I finished around 18 minutes. I think those of you that can do all the push-ups unbroken and move through the pull-ups with kipping or butterfly will have a much faster experience. But again, if you want that extra challenge, hit those pull-ups as strict. Courses coming your way. We have some online courses starting. Primary care physical therapy just sold out yesterday for the cohort beginning next week. The next cohort of that course is going to begin October 31st. Pregnancy and postpartum online with Christina, Alexis, Jess, and Ellison begins September 5th. That course still has a few seats. And then clinical management, fitness athlete, essential foundations with yours truly, Mitch Babcock, Kelly Benfey, and Guillermo Contreras starts September 12th. That is a fun course. We love that course. 8 weeks online, learning to work with a CrossFitter, learning how to apply CrossFit concepts to the general population patient, getting really comfortable with barbell movements, programming, recovery, that sort of thing. So that course is going to start September 12th. Live courses coming your way in September. We have this weekend off. It is Labor Day, but then we really hit September really hard. The weekend of September 10th and 11th, you can join Christina Previtt here at Health HQ in Fenton, Michigan for clinical management of the pregnancy and postpartum live course. That's going to be here at CrossFit Fenton Health HQ. That same weekend, you can join Lindsay Huey out in San Diego for extremity management. You can join Zach Morgan up in Wisconsin for lumbar spine management. Join Megan Peach out in Connecticut for rehab of the injured runner live. You can join Justin Dunaway out in Mill Creek, Washington for total spine thrust. And Jordan Berry will be in Greenville, South Carolina for cervical spine management. And that's just next weekend. We have a whole bunch of courses this month, October, November, a couple hundred courses between now and the end of the year. So check us out, ptonice.com. Speaking of Con Ed courses, that is today's topic. So we're going to reference this paper called The Blind Men, the Elephant, and the Continuing Education course. This was a paper published by Seth Peterson, Dan Ron, Joe Farrell, and Mark Shepard. This paper was published in JLSPT last month, right at the end of July. It's a kind of an opinion piece. It's not a systematic review or randomized controlled trial or anything like that. Just talking about physical therapy, professional development. The Con Ed courses that we go to get our CEUs for almost all of us to renew our licenses. So I want to talk about this paper, the pros and cons, and kind of talk about the continuing education industry as a whole. So this paper makes a lot of good points. I agree with almost all of this paper. It's not saying anything new or unknown to anybody. For those of you who may be watching right now live or listening on the podcast, for full disclosure, ICE is a continuing education company. If you did not know that, we don't look and operate like a normal continuing education company. We share a lot of content. We have a lot of free resources. We have a lot of free CEUs on our website. So you do not need to buy anything from us to get content, to get education, to get clinical tips from us, but we do indeed sell physical therapy continuing education courses. So that being said, our bias is declared. We have obviously a conflict of interest weighing in on this matter that some of you may not be aware of, but now you're aware of it. So this paper kind of tackles that this industry, this kind of continuing competency that most of us have to go through. It's kind of the Wild West that kind of requirements all over the place. With that comes the idea that courses that are given are kind of all over the place. What makes a good course from a bad course isn't really defined. And really this paper kind of hones in on that these courses that we all take to get CEUs, to renew our license, if we look at our outcomes as a profession, they don't seem to be building towards any meaningful change in outcome. And now that's a little bit fair. It's a little bit unfair. It's impossible to track some outcomes. I was just discussing with Christina Previn and Dustin Jones yesterday that for the most part, we have no data on outcomes for hospital-based acute care, right? We don't track people once they leave the hospital and find out if they've fallen again. We can't correlate that. Did the 2 days of PT in the hospital reduce fall risk? There are just some metrics that are outside of our reach. But for those metrics that we can grab, it seems that whatever we're doing across the profession as a whole is not really bumping the needle forward. And I want to start with a couple points here. I'm going to talk about a number of points, 7 points actually. But a lot of these points are going to agree with this article. This article is not open access, unfortunately, but you can email the authors and get the full copy. That's how I got it. The first point I want to make is to agree with this paper and say that it really kind of is the Wild West. And that really comes down to an issue we've talked here on the podcast before a lot, is that every single state runs continuing education differently. They run state practice acts differently. They run relicensure differently. We basically have 40 different countries inside of the United States doing almost a completely different thing with physical therapy, licensure, relicensure, and continuing competence. And it's really difficult to set a standard when there is no standard. When one state doesn't require you to take any sort of continuing competence to renew your license, and another state might say, you need 50 hours a year. You need 50 hours every other. You need to take 2, 3, 4 classes a year or maybe every other year to renew your license. So we have this giant swing in what constitutes continuing competency. We have states that do not require that courses have approval from themselves or another state to count towards your licensure. We have states that require them and require approval but never vet them. So it doesn't really matter if you take it or not because the state literally never checks. We have states that require approval, do vet them, but do so on a random audit basis. And statistically, you could go your whole career without being audited and need to prove that you ever took anything to renew your license. We have states that are on the extreme end of that, where they require approval, they audit, and they audit you every single time, and you have to show proof. Now, that might sound extreme compared to the other examples, but I think that should be the standard. Unfortunately, that's a very small number of states that do that. And then we have the very far end of the continuum. We still have a couple states that don't require continuing competence at all. If you graduated PT school with a certificate in 1965, you have been able to renew your license every single year without proving that you have moved forward in your practice at all. So we have a wide shift state to state. And because of kind of the Wild West nature of the state-by-state basis, it's very hard to create a standardized approach when we're talking about continuing education. My second point is the regulation within states is also all over the place. As far as on our end, what we need to prove to a state can vary very significantly. For example, there is one state in this country that has a one-page form. It costs $500 to have a course approved. You fill out all the information on that form, you click the button, and as long as you have $500 in your bank or on that credit card, you instantly get to a screen that approves your continuing education course. So a robot is approving it. It's obviously an automatic approval. On the other end, you have states that charge $900, $1,200, $1,500 for a course approval. They might have a 10, 15, 20, 30-page application. It might all be handwritten that needs to be faxed or scanned. So you have this, again, this shift, this state-to-state difference that makes it very hard to set a specific standard for continuing competence because every state is so different. And often when we're working with states have farmed out this approval process usually to third-party private corporations that almost exclusively are not in the United States. So when we are applying for approval in a state like New Jersey, the company that approves those CEUs are not run by physical therapists. The employees vetting the courses are not physical therapists. They are people at a call center in India. So it's very difficult to communicate with them, to get a response, to really understand what is required for approval. And you can imagine there's a lot of difficulties there. So again, we have this massive variance, this state to state shift in what is required, which makes it very difficult to develop a nice, clean, standardized approach towards continuing competence. Within that approval process, there's also a large variance. What constitutes a good course, quote unquote, from a bad course, quote unquote, is really variable. For the most part, states seem to care that you have a website, that your course has a bibliography, and they seem to be very focused that you have at least 3 to 5 references from the past 3 to 5 years. So they are interested in seeing that you have new research all the time being cited, which I would really push back on. We have some really good papers that have kind of put a lot of issues nail in the coffin. All of the research on lumbar spine manipulation kind of falls into that category. We haven't really done a lot of large-scale trials on lumbar manipulation since the 90s because it's been shown that you could basically crack everybody's back in America and like 30 people would have an adverse reaction. It's a very safe treatment. We don't need to continue to study that. Nonetheless, these state boards are going by a checklist and they're saying you did not have 3 to 5 references from the past 3 to 5 years. Your course is not approved. Or you had 3 to 5 references from the past 3 to 5 years. That's all we cared about. So now your course is approved, check mark. And they care that the instructor has a resume that shows they have taken their own continuing education courses in recent years. But really, when we look at what's being investigated, for the most part, there is no real investigation in most states into what we're actually being taught, right? They don't usually ask to see our material. They just ask for these kind of checklist items and then give approval. So it can be difficult on this end, on our end, to know what makes a good course based on the requirements that are asked from us. Now, we work with states that are more rigorous. We like that the states that we work with that are more rigorous are the ones that we get approval through. That actually look at our course material, that say, hey, make sure these slides are updated. States that approve on an annual basis versus states that might give approval for 5 or 7 or 10 years, that are looking more rigorously at the coursework to make sure it is evidence-based, that it's up to date, that the same thing is not being taught over and over and over again just to make money. So those are the states that we like to work with. And finally, it's kind of put on us inside that CU approval requirement. It's put on us to make sure that the student is learning. There is no assessment of our assessment, if that makes sense. There's no follow-up between the agency that approves the continuing competence, ensuring that something was actually learned. So we're much more rigorous here at ICE. If you've taken an ICE course, you know we can be downright mean. If you are an hour late to our course, you're not getting CEUs. We're not comfortable saying that you're ICE trained. We're not comfortable saying that you can go tell people that you learned something from us if you missed a portion of our course. You know, if you've taken our online courses, we are mean about you turning in your homework. We are foot to the fire about making sure you turn in your homework, and we do midterms and final exams. We are thoroughly interested in making sure that you've learned something and that what you've learned ideally is going to change your practice, which is kind of the whole point of this paper, that these courses don't change practice, which is what I'm going to push back on. The fourth point I want to make is it's really important that we understand that certifications are made up. Every certification as a physical therapist that you can pursue is made up by the organization that offers it. There is no regulatory body, the government, the APTA, your state board is not regulating certifications. All the letters you can possibly obtain and put after your name. I'm sure you might have a colleague who seems to have alphabet soup after their name. None of those theoretically matter because they're not regulated. There's no evaluation of how you obtain that. It just comes as the nature of taking a course. Sometimes certifications are awarded after taking one course. We're a little bit more thorough here. You know that if you've taken our courses, we require that you take a sequence of courses. We test you in person. Those of you who have taken the Cert ICE in-person exam know that it's probably the most rigorous examination you've ever taken in your life. It's aimed to be more thorough than any practical exam you ever had in school, and the written exam is made to be more rigorous than the board exam. So we're quite mean again here. If we're going to say you're certified by us, that we actually can ensure that you've learned something. And our pass rate for that certification is about 50%. About half the people that come and try out for Cert ICE fail, and we're okay with that. We want to make sure, again, if we're putting a stamp on somebody that's saying this person is certified by ICE, that we are ensuring that you have actually learned something and that you have changed your practice as a result of taking our courses, which isn't always true of every single course. So again, there's no approving body. Most are earned in one weekend. And really kind of what's keeping you from just putting those letters behind your name without taking the course is not that you've taken the course itself, but usually that there's a trademark on those letters and it would be illegal and you could get fined if you did that. But other than that, there's really no quantification or qualification behind certification. It's kind of just all made up, and we need to be aware of that and accept that and look for certifications that are more rigorous in nature if we're going to be pursuing certification. Now, this paper gets into some suggestions of what we can do to improve the continuing education, the continuing competence of physical therapists in the United States. They offer a couple of different solutions. I kind of like how they frame them. They list them as burden. They have low burden, medium burden, and high burden solutions. The low burden solution is to enhance the rigor of approving Con Ed courses. I can totally get down with that. Again, the issue here is not with the continuing education companies or the industry. As we've mentioned on here before with licensure and relicensure, the issue with this is the states itself, that every single state wants to act like a little fiefdom and have their own control over everything. And it's very difficult to get licensed, relicensed in a state, get your Con Ed approved when every single state has different requirements of a wide range of cost and time commitment to do that. So I do agree that is the low burden solution. I also truly believe that that will never happen because based on what's charged to approve a course, it's very clear that a lot of states are making a lot of money off this, and they're unlikely to stop that anytime soon. The medium burden solution offered here is to expand our current system so that mentorship hours in the clinic are counted towards continuing competence. To me, this is the most low burden solution and the most practical solution. I believe the issue with our profession is we throw people into practice and we expect them to see 20 people a day and not have any sort of mentorship or time to reflect on their own practice or availability to a mentor to get feedback on evaluations, to be able to brainstorm treatment sessions, to work on manual therapy skills, to work on exercise skills. If you don't know how to teach somebody how to deadlift, it's unlikely you're going to stumble your way to that. You're probably just not going to do it instead. It's not going to be something you incorporate in your practice. I believe mentorship is very, very important. It's something we recommend when people say, what should I look for in a job? You should look for a job where you know you're going to have mentorship. We do a lot of mentorship here. We always ask our therapists when we hire them how they would prefer to do it. When we're writing up their operating agreement, how do you want it? Do you want it as needed? Do you prefer to ask a question in the moment? Or would you rather block time off every week or every other week and sit down for a larger chunk of time, talk through some cases, have some block practice? Whatever is easier to learn for that therapist is what they get for mentorship. Jeff Moore says it best, our CEO, what doesn't get planned doesn't get done. And what doesn't get planned a lot in almost every physical therapy clinic in America is time for mentorship. So I do believe mentorship with somebody more senior than you as you're starting as a new grad is crucial. I don't see it getting done enough. And I don't, in my heart of hearts, I don't foresee this really happening kind of with the ever-growing high volume nature of our profession. But I think this is the true low burden practical solution. The final solution here is, and the authors agree it is a high burden solution, is to require that after PT school, you go through a residency and a fellowship. So a residency typically takes 1 to 2 years, and then fellowship can take anywhere from 3 to 5 years. Residency, you take some coursework online on your own time, and you have a small commitment to mentorship hours in the clinic as a resident with somebody more senior to you. And usually a residency will prepare you to take the examination for your board certification in whatever specialty you're in. Your OCS if you're in orthopedics, maybe your NCS if you're working in a neurological practice, something like that. Usually as part of that coursework, you are prepared to take that certification exam. Fellowship involves a lot more mentorship, a little bit less class time. You are required to have to go watch fellows. That can be done a little bit virtually and also in person. And most importantly, you are required to have a fellow watch you practice. And again, most of that has to be in person, although a little bit can be done virtually. Now, why is this a high burden solution? This is incredibly expensive. This is incredibly time consuming. We're talking about 5 to maybe 10 years on the higher end to move through both a residency and a fellowship. And we're probably talking about another $50,000 cost on top of what you paid for PT school. The issue with most residencies and fellowships is they're not through university, so you cannot get a grad loan at a lower interest like you may have had for your entry-level schooling. You're usually going to have to put it on a credit card, or you're going to have to take out a private loan. So you're going to have a really high interest rate on that money you need to borrow, or you're just going to need to save for a very long time before you can pursue it. So this is a really high burden solution. I don't agree with it. I think if you want to pursue that, you should definitely pursue that, whatever your goal is. If you believe that residency and fellowship will make you a better clinician, then I believe you should pursue that. But I do believe we should be aware of the cost and time commitment before we talk about mandating this. We have a lot of physical therapists graduating. We've talked about this topic here a lot on the Daily Show. Folks coming out with $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in debt, looking at loan payments every month of $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month of loan payments. It truly is a high burden solution to then expect that person to spend more time making no or less money while adding to their loan debt. It just seems completely unfeasible. What we also need to realize is we really don't have a lot of good research on the outcomes of residency and fellowship of improving clinical practice. We have some moderate evidence showing fellowship helps. We have some moderate evidence showing residency doesn't seem to help. And we have a really small amount of evidence showing that either actually increases your take-home pay. And I think that's a really final important point to make, that if you go through residency and fellowship, you really can't expect to make much more money than when you first came out of school. That at the end of the day, most of us work in insurance-based clinics, and the insurance company does not care how many letters you have after your name. They pay a unit no matter what. They pay the same to a student as they do to a physical therapist that has been practicing for 20 years, who might be residency trained, board certified, and also a fellow. So we need to keep that in mind. I think our industry, our profession is very unique in that regard. I am jealous of my wife. My wife is a social worker. She asked at the beginning of this year, hey, do we have $1,000 for me to take some postgraduate credits? I said, sure. She goes, by the way, when I finish these credits that we're paying $1,000 for, I will get a $5,000 a year raise. Folks, that is a no-brainer. That is a slam dunk. I will pay $1,000 to make $5,000 every time. If I had a machine where I could push a button that would do that, I would just spend all day in front of that machine pushing that button. We don't have that in physical therapy. Other professions do. Social workers have it. Occupational therapists have it. Physicians really have it. When we look at the difference between a primary care physician who is straight out of school versus someone who's residency trained versus maybe a fellowship board certified orthopedic surgeon, we see continual significant bumps in pay as that education level goes up. We don't see that in physical therapy. So it's really hard for me to recommend people to pursue more time making less money while adding more to their loan debt. So I agree with the authors. That is a really, really high burden solution. I cannot imagine going home and asking my wife if we could spend $50,000 and put it on our credit card at 20% interest for me to go back to school for a decade to make no more money after all of that time and money commitment. That would be a really hard sell. So I think we need to be aware of that before we look at pursuing that. We need to talk about what that looks like to pay fellows to fly to you, to do the hours that you need to finish your fellowship at your clinic, or for you to pay to fly to them. That significantly adds to the cost as well. So I agree with the authors. That really is a high burden solution. So summary here, a lot of different points. Yes, we acknowledge continuing education is kind of the Wild West. There are a lot of varying regulations, and it's really the root cause is not the continuing education company itself, but really the states themselves. That as long as we still have 50 states that operate completely independently in their requirements for how they license a physical therapist, how they relicense the physical therapist, we'll continue to have all of these issues that plague the profession. We work with occupational therapists a lot, especially in our older adult division and extremity management division, and we love working with the American Occupational Therapy Association, the AOTA. What's really nice and unique about occupational therapists, athletic trainers as well, is that they are certified and credentialed on a national level. So if you practice in one state, you can practice in any state. You are credentialed and certified on the national level. And all you need to do is prove that and prove that you have your AOTA credentialing, your certification, and you can get a license in any state. Same thing for athletic trainers. What's also nice about AOTA is that they are very, 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 very rigorous with approving continuing competence. Their application took us the better part of a year. It was like writing a PhD thesis. They're completely committed to making sure only the highest quality, practice-changing, evidence-based stuff is approved. But what's also nice is that they approve for 7 years. So when you go through that really rigorous process, the steam lets off a little bit. Very different to physical therapy. So what I think the low burden solution is to all of this is more mentorship in the clinic. If you're sitting here on Leadership Thursday in your leadership position, step back and ask yourself, what am I doing to diligently introduce mentorship to my clinicians if I'm not already? If you're listening to this and you're a new grad physical therapist, you're a student, or you're already a practicing clinician and you're thinking you don't have enough mentorship, it's probably time to sit down with your manager or your owner and talk about what that looks like, about getting that written into your employment agreement. I also think the low burden solution here is to change how we license and relicense PTs in the country. We need to get on board with a national system. We really look foolish with this state by state stuff, that somebody can call me from Florida and say, hey, I heard you can help me modify my CrossFit programming around my back pain. I can't find anybody who lives near me, but my friend recommended you. And I have to say, sorry, I'm not licensed in your state. I can't even technically talk to you. Good luck with your back pain. We look like fools to our patients and to other providers who have national certification and licensure. So I think that is also the low burden solution as well. So those are my thoughts, not yours. Happy to have any discussion with anybody who has any questions, comments, concerns about this. Hope you all have a wonderful Thursday. Have fun with Gut Check Thursday. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend. Stay tuned here to ICE Social Media today at 3 Eastern. We've got a super special announcement about a campaign we're launching. So check out ICE Social Media at 3. Have a good Thursday. Have a good Labor Day weekend. Bye, everybody.